All yours.
Assalamu alaikum
Alaikum
and
salam.
jazakallahu khairan for such a lovely introduction. I think you've mentioned everything. So thank you for such a lovely warm welcome. I'm really pleased to be here.
So, Safira, today we are talking about Muslim chaplaincy. What's the difference between chaplaincy in itself and Muslim chaplaincy? I don't know, can we call it Islamic chaplaincy? Please guide us through.
Well, chaplaincy work is chaplaincy. It's not specific to any one faith group, but you have chaplains that belong to different faith groups. So the work itself is the same, but you're delivering it from within a different faith framework. So, we where I work, we have Muslim chaplains, we've got Christian chaplains, we have Roman Catholic chaplains, we have a Jewish chaplain, so it's just that the work that you do is tailored to the specific faith community that you're working with. But
Hmm.
in terms of the work itself, the chaplaincy work itself is the same. Um, and I don't know whether you want me to kind of give you a little bit of an intro and an insight into what chaplaincy is.
Yeah, I think
But
that would
yeah,
be I think that would be great. And if there's any training, can anyone become a chaplain, um,
sure,
so to
okay.
speak?
So yeah, so chaplaincy is effectively where you're supporting the people you work with in terms of a spiritual and a pastoral and a faith sort of arena. Um, a lot of work that we do is based around helping people to reconnect with their faith, because most people who come into contact with us, and I work for the prison service, most people tend to be going through a really difficult time in their life, and often they've become disconnected with their faith, disconnected from Allah. They're struggling, and more often than not, you find that it's something that gives people a lot of comfort and peace and solace, just to know that there is somebody there that will help them to learn more about their faith and to reconnect with it. So I think really as a chaplain, I consider myself to be in a really privileged position. I love my job. I think it's something it's such a beautiful position to be in when you're not only at work, but you're also at the same time in the service of others. You're in the service of humanity. And I think that's what attracted me to chaplaincy in the first place, in that community work was something that appealed to me. It was something that I did on and off for quite a long time. And so when this opportunity came up to train as a chaplain, and my initial thoughts were, well, what is that? And I realized that actually chaplaincy is exactly what I've been doing for the last 5, 6 years. And it was almost like bringing it all together and formalizing it, and it turned into a qualification almost. And then training, and then getting a job as a formally as a chaplain for the prison service. So it's kind of bringing together everything that that means a lot to me, that I've loved doing over the years. Um, and in terms of your next question with regards to how people would get into chaplaincy, or how anyone would get into chaplaincy, so I did my training at Markfield Institute, which is just near Leicester, which I think some of you have probably heard of. Um, and there are, I believe, other organisations that also do chaplaincy training now. What I would add is that when you become a faith chaplain, when you become a Muslim chaplain, for instance, you also need to have a really good, fairly solid understanding of Islam. So you would be required to have some sort of qualification with regards to Islam. So whether that's Islamic studies, whether it's an alim or an alima course you've done, or whether it's some form of uh, study of Islam.
Is it
And then,
advisable or is it actually a requirement?
well, it's a requirement, because what you will be doing is teaching people their faith, and supporting people with their faith. So actually, one of the fundamental parts of it is knowing your faith to be able to do that for other people. The chaplaincy training that you do is actually putting together the different aspects of the work that's required in addition to the faith work. So you've got things like reflective listening, you've got things like, the spiritual counseling side of things, and how to support people. That's the bit that you perhaps need a bit of training on. But the faith training as well, I always think this, that we never stop learning. We're always learning anyway. And I think that as long as you're in a position where you're doing a course perhaps, or you're engaging in a weekly learning, or a gathering, or a lesson of some sort. I think that's a really good way of keeping it alive and making sure that you're constantly feeding yourself with that nourishment that you need. You're taking that in so that you can then feed that back to where it's
Mm.
needed, to the people that you work with.
So actually, you're discussing with us Tarabia as a continuous process, both for a client and both for a practitioner. Um, and that's so great to hear from you that the same phenomena actually is applicable in chaplaincy, just like it is in the counseling, my field of work. And I just wonder if CPD, meaning continuous professional development, is a part of your profession, something that uh, accreditation for counselors and psychotherapists requiring, but also something that Islam requires, Islamic faith requires from you under the banner of Tarbiyah. Is that something that is comparable in chaplaincy work as well?
I think it is very comparable, yes. And I think it's not just with regards to counselling and psychotherapy and chaplaincy, but I think a lot of fields are like that, where you do have to have that continuous professional development in order to better yourself and improve at your job all of the time. But funnily enough, I've actually got it written in my contract that part of my role is that I am continuously developing my faith and learning about my faith, because it's something that's ever changing. We're learning all of the time, and I think none of us can actually say, what, I've learned everything there is to learn about Islam, and I consider myself an expert. I don't think we can ever say that. So for me, the way I see it is that, as the Prophet ﷺ, quite famously, has said that, the learning of knowledge is from the cradle to the grave. And inshallah, I hope to be immersed in gatherings of knowledge until the day I die. I hope that Allah will facilitate that for me. But yeah, absolutely. I think that when you're working in any role where you're working with people, I think that CPD, or that continuing professional development, is quite key.
Mm. Um, again, I do apologize, but this is the only way I can have this webinar with you, by comparing it to my profession. In counseling and psychotherapy, we have accreditation bodies, we have educational bodies as well. And they both sort of different, meaning one is responsible for training, second is there to make sure that you're working ethically and sort of subjuging yourself to guidance, ethical guidance, professional guidance. Is that something similar in chaplaincy world? Meaning, if I want to train as a chaplain, is there any an overarching body that trains, an overarching body that gives accreditation?
I think it's probably a little bit different to counselling and psychotherapy, because there isn't an overarching body, there isn't a professional body that would oversee all chaplains. What I would say is that when you become a chaplain, you find that there are different groups you can join. So in terms of prison chaplaincy, we have a group where we've got really experienced professional um, people on there who've been chaplains for many years, who take it upon themselves to sort of train up and take newer chaplains under their wing. And it's the same thing with, if you went into hospital chaplaincy, or if you went into higher education chaplaincy, you would have your own sort of networks there. But in terms of the work that we do on a daily basis, we are required to have some connection or some affiliation with our own faith organizations.
Okay.
So that if we ever were to get into a situation where we needed Islamic advice, for instance, you would have somewhere that you could go to, whether you'd seek some advice from a scholar or a mufti, or somebody who is much more qualified than yourself to be able to advise you on what to do in that situation. So when you do start work as a chaplain, and I'm not sure it's the same in other fields such as hospital and higher education, but certainly within the prison system, you are required to have that faith affiliation. So when I got my job, I was required to show proof of my qualifications, which I had from Markfield, and then from the organisations where I studied my Islamic studies. And then I was also required to show that I had an affiliation to a recognized Islamic institution or body within the UK that is well known. So it couldn't just be your local mosque. It would have to be somebody that could say yes, she's affiliated to us, or she's studied here, or and most people tend to put down something like Darul Uloom, or an Islamic institution where they've studied. Um, and I guess that's where you would be getting your continuing professional development from as well, because if they're aware that you're working in your role as a chaplain, they'll be there available to constantly advise you and guide you when you need it. So I do see that as my CPD.
Yeah, I don't see the reason why you wouldn't. But also supervision, which is so important because that makes you feel less isolated. And in a sense, it's a checkpoint for you. That moment when you're making sure that you are working ethically and for the best interest of your clients. So that is how it's being done behind the screens. We've spoken about benefits, how it fits very well with the notions of your heart, with the notions of your spirituality, with the way you understand your religion and your place in this world. Now let's talk about challenges. what what can you talk? What can you tell us? Again, not making yourself maybe too vulnerable, but what can you tell us about challenges? Something to keep in your mind before you make decision into going to chaplaincy. Perhaps some of our viewers are on the crossroads. Perhaps some of our viewers, they do want to become a chaplain. What do they need to know? What do they need to
Sure.
keep on mind?
I think there are quite a few things that you'd want to bear in mind, but I'd say I'll share the most challenging one for me, and that is that supervision or clinical supervision, I would say, doesn't work in the same way in chaplaincy as it does. If you were a mental health professional, if you were a counsellor or a psychotherapist or a psychologist, you would have that clinical supervision in place all of the time, so that you've got that support all the time. And when you're coming away from a case, or when you've worked with a difficult situation, you can come back and you've got someone to offload onto. You've got that supervision behind you. With chaplaincy, it doesn't quite work in the same way, in that you don't automatically get given any form of supervision. And I understand it to be the case with hospital chaplains as well as prison chaplains. And I don't know if it's the same across the board, or whether some chaplains have supervision in place, but we're actually required to have our own sort of support networks in place
Okay.
when we with the work that we do. So it's interesting, and I guess we're not really providing therapy in the sort of counselling sense to people. We're actually providing what you would call spiritual counselling or pastoral support, which is, I guess, a little bit different to counselling and psychotherapy. And so I wonder whether perhaps that idea that the supervision um, perhaps doesn't need to be there in the same way. I don't know, but I think that this is definitely something that needs to be considered overall by the institutions that run these courses and things, because as chaplains, I think we can find ourselves in some really difficult situations, and it's the same with yourselves. As counsellors, you find that sometimes you've dealt with some very, very difficult situations, and you've got people who are offloading onto you some really heavy stuff. And how do you deal with that, and where do you go with that, and how do you sort of navigate all of that? For the vast majority of us, we are parents, we have families, and we come home to our families. And more often than not, you try to leave what what's happened in your day at work at the door before you walk in. But sometimes it's quite difficult, as you can appreciate. And without sharing any details, I mean, I work for the prison service, so we get to hear some very, very distressing stories, some very traumatic events that have happened in people's lives. And when you think about the sorts of crimes that people have committed, and you're talking about some really, really heavy things that are going on in people's lives. And what tends to happen in the prison is that when people come across a chaplain of their faith, the first thing they want to do is to offload, and they want to talk about what's happening in their life or what's happened. And generally, you find that it's not just the crime, it's generally a lot of other stuff that comes with that. There's a backstory. There is always a backstory, and there is, I'd say 9 times out of 10, there's some trauma there. There's either childhood trauma, or there is some form of abuse that's gone on, or there is, something ongoing that the person hasn't had a chance to deal with. And you are picking all of this up, and you are then thinking, right, I'm presented with all of this. How do I deal with this in the best possible way? And I guess, the beauty of it is that we navigate it with our deen. We always look to the faith, and what we're doing is all the advice that we give them is based around what Islam would say, and what the Prophet ﷺ would say, and what duties upon us there are as Muslims in how we deal with these scenarios and these situations. And what we'll often do is, usually the person wants to make dua together or to pray together. We'll do that with them, because that brings them a lot of comfort and a lot of solace. And to some extent, that comforts you yourself as well, because when you're praying with someone, you're not only helping them, you're doing it for yourself as well. And when we make dua as chaplains, I always pray that Allah, give us the best of this situation, in that whatever lesson there is that you want us to learn, both for that person and for myself, help us to benefit from that. So sometimes it can get a bit heavy. I think that not having that clinical supervision in place, I think, is probably the biggest challenge.
But does it mean you can't get the supervision for chaplaincy, or is that just not a requirement?
No, it's not even a requirement. So actually, you're not required to have any supervision in place. But many chaplains will have some support network of their own. They will have a counselor they see regularly or something.
Okay. Do you have like a peer support groups maybe?
We do have peer support groups. How they differ, actually, I'd say, in terms of hospital and prison, I think they're quite different. The hospital chaplaincy is very mixed, and in that they have male and female chaplains, and so you've got really good support networks on both sides. Whereas for prison chaplaincy, as you can imagine, the vast majority of prisons across the United Kingdom are male prisons. We only have 12 female prisons in the whole of the UK. So we're a much smaller team, and we're very spread out across the United Kingdom. So we have a much smaller support network. And I guess that, yes, we have our male chaplaincy colleagues that we can always obviously refer to and speak to, and they're always there. And mashallah, there are some amazing brothers who give fantastic advice. But when you're working in a female environment and you want to discuss, situations that are quite unique to that female environment, it's good to have that female support network around you. And I think that's the other challenging thing, is that we are a very small team of prison chaplains. Yeah.
So that I can see that being a challenge for your mental health as well, and maybe for the quality of service that you're providing. So that's something that we could keep in mind before we make decisions to be chaplain or not in UK, because that's how we can refer. That's what we have experience here in UK. But something is keeping you in. Something is there is something that makes you stick to this profession. Something is in this, because you wake up every day thinking, this is my role, this in this life, in this dunya. Moreover, you went a step higher. You've made decision that it needs to be organized. An organization needs to be born. Let's call it Lantern Initiative. Why Lantern Initiative? How chaplaincy blends with this organization, and what services do you provide?
So the Lantern Initiative obviously has been going for about 5 years now. It wasn't born out of my chaplaincy work. The two are quite different, or quite separate, I should say, in that I started the Lantern Initiative years ago, and whilst on that journey, I decided to train as a chaplain. And I think it was just because the work that I was doing in the community just felt like it needed to be formalized in some way. And so I did also play with the idea for a while of becoming a counselor, but I just felt that that was perhaps a bit too heavy for me. It wasn't something that I was really wanting to go down. I didn't really want to be a person providing therapy because I don't know why I felt that, but I feel as though it's quite a heavy responsibility to take on when you're kind of um, almost responsible for that person getting better. Obviously, there are no guarantees with anything, but the fact that you're taking on another person's healing and recovery. Um, Whereas I guess with the chaplaincy side of things, we always, we're kind of always referring it back to our faith in that, this is what you do when you turn back to Allah, and we can support you by giving you the prayers that you would read or the du'as that you would recite, and the things that you can potentially do to strengthen your faith with Allah. And then at the end of the day, it's between you and Allah and your relationship with Him. Um, so I think that work kind of comes into what I do with the Lantern Initiative, in that we educate and we raise awareness of mental health issues within the Muslim community. And we do that by providing platforms where Muslims can talk more openly about mental health. So we've organised lots of workshops and events over the last 5 years or so. We didn't have very much going on while we were in lockdown, but that's what we would normally do. And the aim is that we're trying to reduce some of the stigma that exists in the community, and
Mm.
also that we want to empower communities in seeking and accessing mental health support. So that you can see the two are quite unrelated, but they're also linked, in that the role that I play as a chaplain, I think that the skills that chaplaincy gives you, I think, can really be they're very transferable into community work. I think if you work in the community, you are essentially a chaplain. You're supporting other people, and you are that pastoral care, I think, is key. That's something I do in the Lantern Initiative, but I've been doing it for a while without realizing I was doing it. And then I became a chaplain, and I'm now doing it formally as well. So that's how the two are connected. But yeah, if you want me to speak a little bit more about the Lantern Initiative, it's something that's grown quite quickly in the last couple of years, and we've got some exciting plans in the pipeline. So we're teaming up with organisations such as Mind. We've got a really exciting new project underway at the moment with regards to perinatal mental well-being in the Muslim community. So I'd say definitely watch this space. We've got lots more coming out about that. We're still in the initial kind of planning and preparation stages, but that will be going live, inshallah, in October. So there will be more details up on our website and on our social media platforms as well. But if your listeners do want to find out more about what we do, you can also visit our website, which is thelanterninitiative.co.uk. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's the Lantern. Don't forget the there on the beginning. Thelanterninitiative.co.uk, and we are also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're not as active on Twitter, but we're trying to. We're learning and we're improving all the time.
Thank you for that, Sapura. I don't think I have any more questions. It's been lovely to learn from you, for myself, and I'm sure for viewers as well. I will drop the line about Lantern Initiative after we finish. I'm looking also at our audience, but I don't see any questions. So I think that means this is it.